on behalf of Miami-Dade County, we call upon the President, Congress, the Senate. We thank you for your leadership and your efforts and many others who have doing that. You know, the reality is that this mosquito is not a registered voter in any of the parties. And that is a reality today. Today we're talking about pregnant women. But remember, that mosquito was the same one who started the dengue, then the chikungunya, and now the Zika. What is next? We don't know. And we need to be prepared. Mayor Jimenez, Mayor Regalado, all the mayors of different municipalities and the county itself is doing everything in our hands. Walking, we have people walking, fumigating in different areas, checking drainage in the areas, checking everything. We started this morning by air also, but we know that we're talking a la para, we're talking a very small area, but who can guarantee that? And Miami-Dade County needs assistance, demands assistance from the government that represents us at the federal level, and we need to make sure that our visitors are safe, our residents are safe, and that no one is afraid to visit Miami-Dade County because of this, and that families are not afraid to go out of their homes and enjoy their life. They deserve that, so I support you 150%, whatever you need from this county, and the mayor is also doing his part, Mayor Jimenez, using funding from our budget, but it's not enough. This is bigger than we are, and there are many questions and many concerns that the public needs answers. So thank you for this opportunity. Gracias por esta oportunidad. El alcalde Jiménez está haciendo todo lo posible, incluso utilizando fondos del presupuesto de emergencia para fumigar por aire y en tierra. Se están chequeando los drenajes, ya que la tabla de agua es muy alta en el condado Miami-Dade y tienden a tener estancada agua. Se están fumigando por todas las esquinas, pero es mucho más grande que nosotros. Este mosquito no es un votante registrado ni en el Partido Demócrata ni en el Partido Republicano. No respeta la vida. Por lo tanto, el mismo que causó el dengue en el pasado, el mismo que causó la chikungunya, es ahora el que está causando el Zika. ¿Qué podemos esperar en un futuro si no lo erradicamos? Hoy decimos que solamente las que van a ser mamás están en riesgo. ¿Quién puede asegurarnos eso? Por lo tanto, apoyamos el esfuerzo del senador, pero necesitamos que el presidente, el Congreso y el Senado respondan a las necesidades del estado de la Florida. Gracias mil.
Senator, can you help break the logjam in the House? You have some influence. Could you call Paul Ryan and say, Mr. Speaker, come on, let's have a conference that reaches some reconciliation?
Well, I have and we will continue to reach out to our relationships that we have in the House. Obviously, in the House process, the chairman of those committees have significant influence, so we're also going to weigh in with some of them. Ultimately, look, I want to be frank. I think the objections the Democrats have raised about the House proposal do not rise to the level. There's nothing that justifies voting against it. There is absolutely nothing in the conference report, in the bill that the House is insisting on, that really has anything to do with Planned Parenthood. I think, quite to be frank with you, Michael, they're making it up because they want a political issue. So I don't think whatever objections they have about that bill rise to the level of voting against it. I also wish the House would have just passed a bill that had nothing on it except Zika funding, because we could have gotten it done. And so that will continue to be my message.
So why, if that's the case, then why would the House have gone to the level it went? That is, why did the House not just send a clean bill?
Mark, I think that's a question for the House members. I don't really understand why something like this needs to get wrapped up in other issues. That said, I just want the money to flow. I think it's that important. I didn't think that the issues that they added to the bill rose to the level of not voting in favor of the $1.1 billion. But there's no doubt that a clean $1.1 billion funding that was just Zika funding and nothing else would have been a lot easier to pass. In essence, the Senate bill would have been a lot easier to pass. So that's a valid question. I don't know the answer to why they've decided to load it up with some other things. But at this point, I just want the money to flow. And it begins with, I understand everyone wants to focus on the congressional process, and it's valid. Let's talk about it. But please, let's not lose focus of the fact there's $300 million sitting there waiting to be spent, and the president refuses to spend it. Why? Let's get moving on the money they have access to right now.
Where do we stand with FDA approval on maybe changing some of the bans on the spray mixtures and the...
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that we'll continue to push for. In fact, there was language about that included in the House proposal that would have created the ability for some flexibility in the use of new technologies to deal with this. As you know, there was a proposal to do it in Monroe County that had more people signing petitions against it than actually live in Monroe County. So there's some outside groups involved in objecting to the genetically modified proposal. But I think as the commissioner just pointed out, the threat that mosquitoes pose to humans extends beyond Zika. I mean, the statistics say that mosquitoes have killed more people than war. That's throughout the history of mankind. So it's not just Zika when we're talking about controlling mosquito populations. So there's an effort to open that up, of course, but it's tied up in the same process, unfortunately.
Senator, would you urge health officials to be more transparent?
I'm sorry?
Would you urge health officials to be more transparent?
Well, I haven't seen lack of transparency per se. I think they're trying to be cautious in what they communicate to the public because they want to know, in fact, that what they're communicating is true. I think they're trying to balance between the need to be aware and misinformation or exaggeration. So I'm not sure what exactly you think they should be more transparent about. In particular, I think as the cases have been diagnosed, they've been releasing that information. I think the public has a right to know, not just the threat, but the potential future threat. I think they've been pretty good about advising people about how to protect themselves. But certainly, if there's a particular instance in which you feel like they haven't been transparent, I'm more than happy to weigh in on that.
Do you feel as if there's a lack of transparency in what you've seen so far?
Well, I think initially in the first 48 hours there was a little bit, I wouldn't say a jurisdictional conflict, but the lead agency is the Florida Department of Health, who I've been communicating with from the beginning of this back in April, and I think are generally doing a very good job. When the CDC became involved, they've kind of taken a secondary role, and as a result, they were a little bit reticent to share some information simply because they wanted the authorization of the Department of Health to share it with us. I think we've overcome that hurdle. I spoke to the director last night, who clearly is a phenomenal public servant and has a real understanding of this threat, and he's coming in tomorrow to go into further depth about not just what we're facing now, but how this could potentially develop. And I know they're trying to be as transparent as possible with the public without creating panic.
You're saying that it was the CDC that wasn't completely forthright with the information?
No, the lead agency in the response right now to Zika in Florida is the State Department of Health, and I have no problem with that. When the CDC became involved in the last 48 or 72 hours, they were a little bit concerned about what their proper role was in terms of communicating to the public, because they thought that the Florida Department of Health wanted to be the lead agency in communicating to the public, and I understand that. You don't want duplication of effort, and you don't want conflicting messages. I think that arrangement is working well. I was a little bit concerned about that at the front end. So I talked to the director last night at around 8:30. He expressed to me kind of their process for public communication and how they're going to funnel all that information through the Department of Health so that they're speaking in one voice. I'm comfortable with that arrangement, but I'll meet with him tomorrow and go into further detail, not just about the threat in Wynwood right now, but about where this goes next. Like what are the potential next developments in the spread of Zika?
How do you keep this from becoming another political football?
I'm sorry, yo voy ahora en español, perdón. I'm sorry.
How do you keep this from becoming another political football? Congress left for vacation early. How do you bring Congress back to Washington, D.C. during primary season when they really don't want to work on this bill at all anyway?
Well, I encourage you to go back into my speeches in April and May where I was on the Senate floor basically saying this is what was going to happen. If you go back, you'll see the video of me saying there's going to be a mosquito-borne infection, probably in Florida, in the middle of August, and we're all going to have to scramble back here in the middle of your elections to deal with this issue. And that's exactly what's happened. How you do it, I think you just keep calling attention to it. So here's what I think the likelier scenario is. In a perfect world, the president would fully spend that money right now, and Congress would go up there on Monday and pass this, or we could do it in a pro forma session. Literally, you could have a pro forma session where the Senate gavels in for a few minutes, votes on this bill. I know Senator Nelson talked about it. The House could do the same, and it becomes law. If one senator objects, then you're going to have a full session. But that would be the ideal scenario. I think the likeliest scenario, knowing the players, is that this deal doesn't get dealt with until early September. But in the meantime, the president could spend at least $175 to $200 million of the $300 million that they have access to. Because in the end, you're not going to be able to spend $1.1 billion in a month anyway. So let's be realistic here and let's be rational. Let's spend the money we already have access to, and then when Congress reconvenes in early September, we'll pass the rest of it. I'm ready to go tomorrow morning, if that's what they call, and I want us to do it tomorrow morning.
Senator,
But either way, that money needs to be spent, the money the president has access to.
Senator, how come your party's nominee isn't talking about this at all?
You'll have to ask the Trump campaign.
Well, the Trump campaign's vice chair told the Boston Globe vice chair for Miami-Dade that Zika wasn't that big a deal, that we have to really focus on more important things like keeping it legal.
Yeah, I understand. I'm not a spokesperson for their campaign, and so I'm not going to speak on their behalf. I can talk to you about where I stand and what I'm saying about it, and I think this should be I think this is a big issue for anyone who seeks public office.
You're calling on President Obama to come out and say something. You're calling on Congress to come out and say something. And we ask you about Donald Trump, you're like, hey.
No, I'm not asking for President Obama to say something. I'm asking for President Obama to do something. President Obama has access to $300 million, and he can spend that money right now. I'm asking Congress and the leadership of my party to step forward and take action and authorize spending on this. Yeah, I haven't mentioned Hillary Clinton either in all of this. So,
Hillary Clinton's gone out there and talked about it.
yeah, I understand. Hopefully that'll change today, and the Trump. I'm sorry. Let me just answer this question. Hopefully that'll change today, and the campaign will communicate on this and say something.
Isn't that the kind of the gray area that your party has accused President Obama of exploiting for years, using something for purposes that were not originally intended and not following the strict will of Congress?
Yeah, I don't. What gray area? I'm sorry.
President Obama can use existing funds that have not specifically been allocated for Zika, but isn't that
No, they have been. They were.
party for many years?
No, that's not correct.
President Obama has misallocated resources or done things unilaterally without Congress's approval.
No, actually, those funds were authorized by Congress for Ebola, and then Congress has approved and is in favor of. No one's objected to repurposing it for Zika, but in essence, those funds have been made available for public health spending to deal with an emergency. We don't have an Ebola emergency anymore. We have a Zika emergency. We suggested, and multiple members of Congress pushed for the president to use existing public health dollars for a new public health threat. No one's objected to that. So the money's available there now, and it was always part of this conversation. So it's very different from executive action that rewrites law. I will add, with regards to the repurposing of the funds, that one of the things this points to is the need to create something I support, which is a permanent fund for public health emergencies, so that the next time we have an outbreak, whether it's another Ebola or a Zika or anything in between, that money is available to be spent in the way that we're using the Ebola funding now, and not have to rely on the congressional process to get authority because of how long it takes things to get done in
So
Congress.
before Spanish, can you just talk politics for one quick second with regards to Mr. Trump? Do you still support Mr. Trump?
Guys, I'm here to talk about Zika today. There are like countless statements on my behalf on everything that's happened this week in the campaign. I encourage you to go online. They're all over the place.
Senador, le preguntaba, ¿usted no cree que las autoridades a nivel federal, pero también estatal, se han dormido de Zika? Se está hablando durante meses, y ahora cuando una zona turística de Miami se ve afectada, entonces las autoridades o el gobernador o los alcaldes empiezan a hablar del tema.
No, yo no creo que eso es justo. Yo he criticado al gobierno cuando es apropiado, pero también tengo que decirte de que empezando en marzo hemos tenido reuniones, la comisionada Sosa ha estado ahí, las autoridades locales, tuvimos una reunión en el aeropuerto sobre este tema hace meses. Esta es la tercera conferencia de prensa que yo he hecho aquí hablando sobre este tema. He abogado a favor de esto empezando en enero. Así que ha habido bastante, se ha conocido esta realidad y sabíamos que este momento iba a llegar por la naturaleza de esta enfermedad. Lo que me molesta a mí es que hay fondos disponibles que la administración tiene, que es accesible a la administración en este momento, más de $300 millones y no lo están utilizando para combatir el Zika. Y lo que me molesta a mí es que el Congreso y ambos partidos, incluyendo el mío, no actuaron lo suficiente rápido sobre este tema durante meses, en abril, en mayo, en junio, en julio, donde yo hablé sobre este tema y al principio era casi imposible que alguien le prestara atención, no pensaban que era un tema serio. Ojalá que a través de lo que ha ocurrido ahora trágicamente, pero también traiga lo positivo de que ahora tomen acción y que sepan la realidad de lo que estamos enfrentando.
What's the time frame for getting contact? Is it ongoing, talking to the House committee chairs?
Yeah, again, I mean, just so you understand, certainly we can reach out to people in the House, but ultimately, I mean, the people who are going to have most influence on somebody in the House is a House member. And that's just the way it is. We'll be more, I think my position on this is pretty clear. I've been talking about it since April with multiple members of the House. I've been frustrated by the way that process has moved forward. It took long to get going in the Senate, too. But ultimately, the fact that the Senate came together and passed something is a good thing. And I'm glad that we did. And I was hopeful when they went into conference with the House that we would reach a proposal that everyone could vote for and we could act on this. It didn't turn out that way. I hope everyone will reconsider and we can get something moving here quickly. But I have to ask you guys again, you are losing focus on the fact that there's already money there. Even if we authorize $1.1 billion tonight, you can't spend $1.1 billion in a week, but there's $300 million of money available to be spent right now. And I think the question is, why isn't it being spent, and when is it going to start to be spent? Because we can use that money right away.
Senator Nelson suggested that maybe if someone with Zika travels to Kentucky and infected somebody in Senator McConnell's home state, that they would start to care. Do you think this is like a parochial issue for your fellow?
Well, what I've said is, and I'm not singling out an individual senator, what I've said this already this week is, for a lot of my colleagues in both parties, this is an issue that happened somewhere else, but they didn't see it as a threat to them. And that's unfortunate. My argument I've been making to people, this mosquito is present in 38 out of 50 states. I believe there are now a Zika infection in all but 2 states in the country. A U.S. territory in Puerto Rico has already been deeply impacted by this. So my argument that I've made to people repeatedly is, you're going to have Zika cases. You're going to have cases of microcephaly that wind up in your communities, whether it's travel or domestically transmitted, and it's just a matter of time. But it has been frustrating, the fact that for many of my colleagues from around the country, Zika is a problem some other part of the country or part of the world that they don't think will ever reach them. I think that's true for members of both parties in both chambers, unfortunately. Hopefully that will begin to change.
You said Florida had $700,000. How much from Puerto Rico?
Well, Puerto Rico's gotten significant funding on the front end because that we're facing the crisis. I don't know the exact number. I can get it to you, but still not enough, because Puerto Rico's facing a number of challenges beyond just Zika, all of which are placing a strain. I mean, they're in the middle of a fiscal crisis as well. And their bigger problem is the long term of Zika, because of the cases of microcephaly, and the cost of treating children with this is going to place a tremendous strain on their public health system, which is one of the reasons why both the House and the Senate bill, but particularly the House $1.1 billion proposal, had in it provisions to help public health authorities in Puerto Rico to deal with the long-term impact of Zika, not just the immediate impact.
Did you say the federal government has only spent $700,000?
No, the federal government has authorized, I believe last week, about $40 million to be spent nationally, of which 700, and I'll confirm that number, I have it here written, but of which only $700,000 have been assigned to Florida, which is unacceptable. And if you saw yesterday, Congressman Ross Layton and virtually the entire House delegation wrote a letter to the director arguing that that was unacceptable, given the fact that Florida is the first state and the most deeply impacted by Zika.
Senator, have you had second thoughts about supporting Donald Trump in light of the comments about the Khan family, about the...
Yeah, Michael, I'm here to talk about Zika today. Excuse me, let me answer this question. I've repeatedly discussed this, okay? And I'll say it again. The Khan family are a heroic family. Their son was a hero. Captain Khan was an American hero. I encourage you to go back and see the last CNN debate, the last presidential debate, where I addressed this issue by reminding people of brave Americans who are Muslims, who wear the uniform of this country, who have died in the service of this country, and the crescent moons are on their tombstones at Arlington National Cemetery. If you travel, as I've been able to do, and meet with military personnel, particularly in the Middle East, who are deployed, you will see Americans who also happen to be Muslim serving our country and willing to die. And that's my views on it. I don't agree with what has happened here over the last few days. That said, the broader issue is a binary choice in this election. That's what this election is. I remind everyone, I ran. I wanted to be the nominee. It didn't work out. Voters chose a different path, and they've given us the choice we have right now. And it's a choice in my mind between someone I disagree with on many issues and someone I disagree with on every issue. And that's the choice before us. And I can tell you this, I will never do anything to assist Hillary Clinton to become president of the United States. I consider her to be someone who's dishonest, who's constantly in the eye of a storm regarding scandal, who I believe has dangerous views about America's role in the world, who was the Secretary of State that presided over the most disastrous foreign policy in modern American history, and it would be a continuation of 8 years of failure of the Obama administration. Those are pretty strong feelings. In the end, I mean, there's no way I can ever support someone like her, and voting for the way some people suggest would be supporting her, and so.
Trust is a huge issue here. Trust is huge. Senator, do you trust Mr. Trump with the nuclear
I mean, you're a
codes?
foreign policy guy. It doesn't bother you that Trump didn't know that Russia invaded Crimea 2 years ago?
Guys, again, I think to the extent that you guys are well aware that I have differences of opinion with Donald on a number of issues. And when he expresses things I don't agree with, I'll be clear about those. For example, the Republican platform has a provision about Crimea and Ukraine and not arming the Ukrainian. I disagree with that provision, and I've spoken out against it, and will continue to do so. In the end, I'm responsible for the things I believe in, for the things I stand for. And if you have questions about where some candidate stands, you should ask them. For example, I encourage you to ask the Democrats running for Senate how they feel about the fact that President Obama sent $400 million in cash in the dead of night to the Iranian regime at the same time as 4 American hostages were being released. That sort of ransom payment as part of the Iran deal is an outrage and a scandal. And I hope it receives the same amount of coverage, because that's actually something that has happened. Not something someone is saying they might do when they become president. That's something that actually happened. And I would hope that you guys would give that as much attention as you've given some of these other issues that you keep asking me
Senator,
about.
trust is a huge issue. Would you trust Mr. Trump with the nation's nuclear codes?
Look, guys, I'm here to talk about Zika. I know you want to talk about politics. I can tell you I don't trust Hillary Clinton as the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And that's the choice we have right now. I look forward to serving in the Senate, which has a constitutional role in this republic, to act as a check and balance of on presidents, no matter what party they're from,
Would you
on multiple
put his
issues.
hand on the button, so to speak?
All right, anybody else on Zika?
Tourists going through Wynwood, sleeveless, seemingly unaware of the issue, not wearing bug spray. Whose job is it to change that and make the tourists and other people more aware?
Well, and I'll let I'll let Commissioner Sosa comment on that, but I would say that this continued public awareness campaign on behalf of the Department of Health, local authorities, and to the extent necessary, the CDC is part of that effort. Ultimately, it comes down to personal responsibility here. I mean, people have to understand. Look, last night we have dramatic rainstorms here in South Florida. There are now puddles of standing water in people's backyards. If you don't want a mosquito outbreak in your immediate vicinity, ensure that at some point tonight you dump out that water, make sure that your pool is being properly treated if you have a pool, and make sure you're both covering yourself to the extent possible with clothing, but also with mosquito repellent. Avoid times of days when mosquitoes are prevalent. I mean, these things are readily available for us as people to go out and do things to protect ourselves. So there's always been a level of personal responsibility involved in this. And to the extent we can put out information about it, we should, and we'll continue to. Both my offices, but certainly the CDC, the applicable federal agencies. I know the county's doing that. I know the city's doing that. I know the state is doing that. And perhaps Commissioner Sosa can comment further on those efforts.
Senator, just for the information, even police officers, departments in the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County are walking the streets with distribution of materials, teaching the community how to deal with the problem, checking their properties to make sure they know what to do. At the same time that we are using everything in our hands, and to respond to the Diario Las Americas at the beginning, we were standing here back in January with Mayor Jimenez. After that was Curbelo, Congressman Curbelo. So we have been working on this, and Mayor Regalado, for a long time. This is not something that local governments are reacting now. As a matter of fact, they told the health department when we had a meeting here back in January that we were going to use everything in our power to prevent, but we knew it was coming. We knew it was going to get worse because of the weather, because of the temperature, because of the rain. And that's why we are doing everything in our power, walking. As a matter of fact, we have Mayor Regalado walking now in Alapata. We have Mayor Jimenez doing that yesterday. We have all the departments, the officers walking, and the first responders. But it's not enough because we don't have the means to be able to do a lot more. And that's why it's so important to ask the senator to pressure the federal government so we can get the funding that we need, so we can eradicate this from becoming something even bigger than we are.
Commissioner, why are we not using the emergency broadcast system to inform the public and run PSAs to let them know what to do to prevent Zika virus?
We are, and we have been doing that for a long time.
I have not heard a single emergency broadcast system.
Okay, if you go to the county's TV channel, if you go to MIA, If you go to
I'm
Port
talking about the
Miami,
emergency broadcast system that preempts all FAA-regulated aired television and radio in this country. Why are we not using that channel to educate people?
but I think that all the elected officials at the local level you have responded to all of us in an incredible, wonderful way. Your TV channels, your radio stations, everyone have been wonderful, writing in newspapers. So you have been working, all of you, with us, because we are on this together, and you are the ones that can help us bring the message to the community in an easier way. So thank you for that.
Let me just add that actually your point is a good one. And the federal government actually has authority over that system because it preempts FEC regulation. So when I meet tomorrow with the CDC director, I'll ask him about whether, it's the first time I've heard someone suggest that, and certainly it's something that I'll bring up and see if why wouldn't we want to do it at the appropriate time, even if it was just targeted the way a weather alert would go out, for example, in the case of a weather situation. I know there was one more question for
What the
you.
$300 million could do in the meantime that cannot be accomplished by the $1.1 billion?
Well, a lot of it would go to public awareness. A lot of it would go to potentially developing not just antivirals, but ultimately a vaccine. There are about 15 companies that are currently trying to develop both antivirals and vaccine, including Scripps Florida. So hopefully a lot of that money will go towards that. A lot of it will go towards mosquito control. A lot of it will go towards better vigilance in terms of tracking potential cases of microcephaly and ensuring that the services are available for pregnant women and their unborn children to be diagnosed with Zika, diagnosed with microcephaly, and have the appropriate support network in place for them. There's a variety of ways that it could be spent, but on the front end, I think the vast majority of it would be towards backfilling and creating a more robust mosquito control program for the remainder of the summer. Mosquito season in Florida is going to be here till about early November, so we still have some months to go in multiple parts of the state. And I can tell you there's also deep concern in different parts of the state. I spoke yesterday to the Senate President, Andy Gardner, who expressed concern about Central Florida and the reality that if there were a mosquito and transmission anywhere near Central Florida, the impact that would have on theme parks and so forth, given the environment there. So I think there's beyond just South Florida, there's a concern about what this could mean to the rest of the state. So one of the things we'll talk to the CDC director about tomorrow is exactly those bylines of spending. But that's generally the direction that would go in much of this fund. This has to be the last question. I apologize.
Con su licencia y su disponibilidad, dos preguntas sobre Cuba, por favor. Dos, en Turbo hay 4.000 cubanos a punto de ser deportados. Y la segunda, Fariñas y más de 10 disidentes están en huelga de hambre. Por favor, que se pronuncie sobre esos temas.
Dos cosas sobre Cuba. Primero, yo hablé con Fariña la semana pasada, el viernes. Lo encontré en buen espíritu, pero obviamente sufriendo físicamente. Estoy muy preocupado por su salud. Respeto mucho el sacrificio que está haciendo. Personalmente sería una tragedia perderlo, porque es una voz muy importante en la causa de una Cuba libre. Pero estamos en solidaridad con él y yo lo llamé la semana pasada y hablamos por más de media hora y realmente le deseé todo y le deseé lo mejor y sigue estando en nuestras oraciones. En el caso de las personas viniendo de Cuba, esto es un viaje sumamente peligroso. Y yo le pido al que esté pensando venir, que yo entiendo la desesperación, pero no lo hagan. No lo hagan, no se tiren al mar y no traten de cruzar por Centroamérica. Vas a estar en manos de los elementos más peligrosos y más criminales del mundo. Y yo cuando estuve en Honduras hace un par de meses, tuve ocasión de encontrarme con un cubano que estaba atravesando a través de Honduras, entrando en Guatemala y a México, y yo se lo dije personalmente, por favor no lo haga, porque cuando entres en Guatemala y en México vas a estar en manos de uno de los carteles más peligrosos, más criminales del mundo. Desafortunadamente la desesperación en Cuba es enorme y ha empeorado la situación después de este arreglo que ha hecho Obama con el régimen castrista. Thank you guys for coming today.